Ryan. I work at a company called GitHub. It's a small, we're up and coming. It's an incubated company inside of Microsoft, kind of like a startup. I'm just kidding. It's massive, and like we're more Microsoft every day, to be quite frank. So feel free to, actually on that note, ask me whatever questions you want. I am sharing my screen, and I thought it was pretty apt to say what the last content I made, which wasn't this. My last content was actually an hour ago. I live stream on the GitHub education channel, how to build a Twitch bot using Twitch and GitHub, the API and webhooks. I've been on a tear right now and trying to get the Twitch community to build GitHub integrations because I work at GitHub, and it's a nice slow bleed into integrating with everybody else who's live coding on Twitch, which is the thing I'll start talking about in a couple slides from now. But the other thing I shipped, which it was automated, is a YouTube video about developer relations, which I thought would be super apt for this group here. Did not plan this. I already had this video recorded 2 weeks ago, and I have a whole plan on how to record YouTube videos and get them out on a regular basis for my channel and for GitHub as well, because I'm doing a little GitHub YouTube stuff. You'll see my face there a lot. And I have a whole story of how that happened and also where I came from and how I got to GitHub, but we'll save that for Q&A. I also will say, if you do have something that you just need to ask during the presentation, I am happy to get stopped and answer the question or reiterate and have explanations or whatnot. But this is something that I've been really focused on primarily, and I'll get into my background as part of the slides go through. But everything you need to know about me is actually BWO on Twitter. Everything's linked there. You'll get to know me really quickly because I'm just pretty open about what I'm trying to accomplish. The only thing is you won't find is a picture of my dog because I don't have one. But let's just talk about this. So 2020 was an interesting year. I made a joke on Twitter that this is 2020-01-final.txt or no, -2.txt. Because when I say last year, I still do this. I say, oh yeah, in the last year or the whole last year, whatever. I know we're 3 months into this year, and I continue to say, oh, for the past year, I've been doing this. And I know we're only 3 months in this year, but I'm trying to learn to to forget 2020. But the things I learned in 2020 is in January of last year, we actually sat, we came from an event. When I say we, I work at GitHub. I'm a developer advocate there. I am the only developer advocate at GitHub, so just keep that in mind. But we sat after going from FOSDEM, which is an open source conference, to engage open source maintainers, which is our sort of MVP group. If you all have groups that you cater towards, like open source maintainers is ours, or one of ours. We have multiple. But we did a lot of traveling. We actually had a whole plan to be in Asian Pacific, to be in APAC, to do events. FOSS Asia was the one that we're going to next in Singapore. We're going to be in Japan quite a bit. We're going to be in China for a bit for various conferences and engagements and connecting with community there. And that all sort of got the rug pulled out from under us in January because we saw FOSS Asia got canceled. So we knew it was coming up. It was going to be another sort of cancellation of all of Asia conferences. So we sat down and came up with a plan of what to do next. And part of my background is I come from another Heavybit portfolio company called Netlify. That's where I got connected with the podcast, JAMstack Radio, as well as became a developer advocate at Netlify, because originally I was an engineer, a front-end engineer, which is a whole nother story about that. I wasn't really a front-end engineer. I just happened to know how to write JavaScript and then just learn really fast. So we had to come up with a plan, and the plan became something I was just doing as a side project, which was live streaming. One thing that I found as a developer advocate is you're always trying to find, you got to always keep yourself up to date with the latest and greatest in technology. So I found that live streaming every once a week or every infrequently, I could figure out how to write code on the job, build something, but then sort of check all the boxes and create community. So I started doing that in January. Everything shut down by March in San Francisco, as Ted was alluding to when he took the mic from Heavybit. So with that, we ended up, my whole story, which I'll get into, is we ended up eventually just creating a Twitch account on Twitch for GitHub. And it was funny because someone actually at GitHub already created it, so we had to find out who did, and then we just ended up getting it from them. But long story short, GitHub, I'm going to go on a whim and say you probably know what GitHub is, so I don't have to explain it, but we are a decentralized platform built on the blockchain to connect. Just kidding. There's no blockchain, but Git is decentralized. We're a collaboration platform. And The one thing that I love about GitHub and doing DevRel at GitHub is that I don't have to worry about you. Like my goal is not really to get you to sign up for GitHub. And my approach to DevRel is built on that premise that you're more than likely have a GitHub account. So what I get to focus on is actually features and making sure that people are up to date with the features that GitHub is shipping. So my approach is very different. Like I know with a lot of the Heavybit companies, or a lot of your companies actually, because I know a couple of them, and I've connected with you previously. You're up and coming, like you're growing a community, so like you do want to make sure people sign up for your stuff. So this, with that caveat, but I would say the pitch, the selling point, it's different when you're not really trying to make them sign up, and you're not really going to meetups or Twitch accounts and trying to make sure everybody that signs up at the Twitch gets an email from you and stuff like that. It's like it feels way more marketing than it does developer relations. So, and if something I've always proud myself of not doing sales, not doing marketing, but just doing engaging activities to keep people to follow you. So I mentioned GitHub shipping features. I didn't really get into that, but GitHub shipped a lot of features in the last year, and they're easy to miss if you're not paying attention. So my job is to basically just create examples, create Twitch interactions on Twitch and talk to live streamers to get them to use those features. And then my job's a lot easier. And that's how I can be the one developer advocate doing this thing, because I kind of engage a lot more community. I'm sort of skipping ahead to where the sort of the meat of the topic is, but I did want to talk about Beyonce's feature, which shout out to Beyonce, who got 28 Grammys, including Megan Thee Stallion in this feature here. I mean, you got to give it for Bey. But I also give it for Bey because I call myself the Beyonce at GitHub, and I do that intentionally because up until now, I've not actually shown you a picture of me because for the most part, if I'm sitting on stage or doing a live stream to 500 people, you'll probably forget who I am. Like, hopefully you'll remember the pizza behind me, but at least you'll remember that I'm Beyonce at GitHub, and you can Google that and my name will show up. But I have a whole origin story about Beyonce and Destiny's Child that I gave for another talk, which I'll spare you for, but I just want to tell you that Beyonce was up and coming. They put the work in. Destiny's Child put the work in. They fired her dad as a manager, and then they sort of blew up one day. But the thing I want to point out about Beyonce is the beehive, and that's something that I think a lot of times we don't really take enough time to think about what that is, or not the beehive, but we don't think about like what this super group is. The beehive. It's a community of people who empower Beyonce to do what she does. So, for example, the Beehive, it's a super fan group. I didn't really explain that. But back in Coachella days, a couple years ago, I think like 2017, 2018, they renamed it Beychella, to the point where I cannot tell you who performed at Coachella that year because all I remember is Beyonce. And then not to mention also the Netflix documentary as well. Like, it solidifies the fact that I can't tell you who was popular musician only a couple years ago, because like Beyonce kind of stole the show. And what I do is I try to make sure that I set myself in positions where folks come along with me on the ride to elevate the stuff I'm doing. And it makes it so much easier and make impact at the end of the day. So I don't think, and like, if you look at my Twitter, it's like only like what, 5,000 people who follow me. Like, that's not really the goal. And I think what I try to do always focus on is don't focus on the numbers, focus on the impact. And when people would really adopt your features and really are engaged to the point where they're creating their content for you, it really shows and it really helps down the road. And I know you could actually, we'll get into this. If the question comes up, I don't want to rebut my statement, but if you do have a rebuttal, feel free to ask the question, but I'll move on to mention finally myself. This is what I look like on the internet. I'm a Beyonce advocate at GitHub, and I use that term like flagrantly all over the place, where the point where our CEO of GitHub will call me Beyonce. I'm just kidding. He doesn't call me Beyonce, but he acknowledges my status at GitHub and what I'm sort of working on. Those are my handles. That's my GitHub profile. There's a difference, BDuckEO on Twitter and BDuckEO on GitHub. I do have BDuckEO on GitHub as well, but I just like the shorter handle. But what I always do is I think of what would Bey do. And I think it's pretty apt as well, because I always show this GIF. Bey goes to bat for the hive. So I'm always in people's DMs. I'm always on, I've got a tweet deck where I'm actually following different features and Twitter conversations and injecting myself in the conversation with answers. I become the action jackson of GitHub, specifically GitHub Actions. because I just kind of stalked a lot of people who were doing more than I was and give them all the information they need to become better than me at this feature. And that's kind of what I've done in the past year. Something that comes up a lot is what does a developer advocate at GitHub do? And I know it's easy to sit here and this is what I can rebut, but GitHub has 50 million developers worldwide. It's a lot of users, and that's why I don't really focus too heavily on getting people to sign up for GitHub, because I think that's it's a given. Like, you don't need to focus on that as a GitHub developer advocate. My real focus is what I mentioned before. It's really just go to bat for the hive. Go to people who are doing great stuff and elevate them through third-party content or through having them guest post on on the GitHub platform. I think that's the biggest thing I can offer folks who want to grow their career, grow their engagement, grow their knowledge of GitHub, is give them a platform to showcase what they know about GitHub and showcase themselves as an expert, which I'll get into how I do that. I do want to point out that the way I've sort of been able to kind of incept the idea of advanced level features that are shipping on a regular basis through GitHub is I created a GitHub organization, which is, for me, was pretty low effort because I work at GitHub. So like I realized the benefit in the position where I sit at, but there's a lot to learn from this, where I built a workshop that's all, you can basically, when you go to the repo, which is called Start Here, you just click on Start Here and it teaches you all about GitHub Actions. And it used to teach you about GitHub Apps because that was one of my goals 3 years ago. But the goal here is really, if I can go to a conference and someone says, hey, we have a spot for a workshop, but someone needs to take it. This has happened quite a few times in my career. I just happen to be in the right place at the right time. I just go to this repo and I'll give a whole workshop. I did this in Brazil. I did this in a couple other places in North Carolina, and All Things Open. They had an open slot and I'm like, hey, I've got something prepared. So I have this craft work, and it's really just a place that I ideate. I don't know. I sort of like I call it the minor league of what my next thing is going to be. I throw into this repo and I just create like a curriculum and I create content, and I just sort of a couple of different repos I do this in, but this is the main one where I just sort of create an idea of like what I want to talk about in the future. And then eventually I'll have a talk or a YouTube video or something to talk about, because I've sort of been practicing in the open, actually in public, despite the fact that no one's really watching that repo. So I say all this, and I've been kind of like really mentioning this, but haven't really said it. The best way to advocate is to make advocates. And that's what I try to do, is I try to find the next great GitHub advocate by finding people who are already doing the stuff. Like, there's a guy who wrote a book on GitHub Actions. As soon as I heard that he was doing that, I got into his DMs. I said, let's have a meeting. Here's all the information you need. Don't forget to leave this, don't leave this out. Add this stuff to your book. And then his book is like a wild success. And it's because I just jumped in early when I first found out that he was doing the thing. And then instead of me write the book, I had him write the book. And I think that's a lot of what I do is, and I say this because I think you should probably write the book every now and then, but I'm at a point in my career, as well as my engagement at GitHub, that I could write a book about GitHub, or I could do a course about GitHub, and I think it will do very well. But what I want to do is have someone else do it, so that way they can maintain it down the road. And then when it comes time to hire the second advocate, I'm going to go knock on their door and say, hey, it's time to work at GitHub. What are you doing? So that's usually my angle of what I'm trying to do. It's actually the same thing we did at Netlify as well. And Netlify's got a great team too as well. And they had a lot of people who were already talking about Netlify on a regular basis. And when it was time to hire, it was super easy because there were some clear people who stood out in the community. The one thing I want to point about travel, and I know this is something that's probably going to come up. I know not everybody, maybe everybody is in the Bay Area. I'm not sure how many people are working remote or people are here in the Bay, because I know you just onboarded a couple companies as well. But New York. Okay, cool. So we do have people outside the Bay. But travel is an opportunity to really engage communities that you can't engage directly in your reach. I think San Francisco and New York are great places to be and have advocates, because you can simply just go across the street and have a meetup and have a talk there. I've been to tons of meetups at Heavybit, and I've made lots of networking and lots of connections just by being in that office. And the one thing I did early in my career at Netlify is I created a 369 plan. And 369 is a plan that 369 sounds like I'm one of the yin yang twins, but no, it's 3 months, 6 months, and 9 months. And I create these plans really to sort of outline where I want to be and what would be the steps to take those in 3 months, 6 months, and 9 months. And part of that plan I did with Netlify was I wanted to make sure that Netlify was at every boot camp. So the one thing that helped a lot with the growth of Netlify was actually, there was no program, there's no infrastructure to kind of talk about it after the fact, but I would just cold email all the founders of all the boot camps that you all heard of and say, hey, if you want to build static sites and you want to leverage the new Create React app, the build tools, the new static rendering, all that stuff that's now cutting edge and happening in 2017, why not host it on Netlify? And I'd get a lot of rebuttals. They're like, no, we want to teach them AWS because AWS is, that's going to get them the job. And I would convince them that AWS is not going to get you a job. What's going to get you a job is shipping something really quickly. And I would show them how quickly, like you could deploy a Netlify site in 10 to 30 seconds. So I would just go with my laptop in hand and show people how easy it was to deploy Netlify sites. And I used to do this in person at conferences. I would go knock on their doors and say, hey, I'm in town. Would you like to have like a quick, a sandwich or whatever, or a coffee? And I can show you all about Netlify. And it's like very much a sales tactic, but it felt less sales because what I would pitch them with is, hey, would you like to learn about how someone from a boot camp, which was myself, because I did go to a boot camp, could engage, could represent their portfolio, their blog, and all the resources that they're sort of put together really quickly. And then how I got my job, my first job, and then how I moved to San Francisco. So I basically just sold a story of how you could onboard as a developer, as a new junior developer. And I would just present that. And at the end, there was a call to action was just like, oh, by the way, the entire slides that you just saw was hosted on Netlify. So I had like my slides.netlify.com and people could walk away with the slides, be like, oh, what's Netlify? Let me just remove slides. And then that's how I sort of engaged them. And then we'd have a lot of follow-ups and I'd get another opportunity to speak and pitch to their communities and their boot camp. And it was a thing I did. And I say it on the back of travel because what I would do is I would go speak in a city in the US, and then I would look for all the boot camps in that city. And then I would look for all the meetups in that city. And I would pitch the same talk to all these boot camps, all the meetups. And then usually what would happen is I'd have like 6 talks that I would give for the week that I was there, in addition to the conference talk. So like I treated conferences very differently than how I treat them now, where I just go and hang out with friends and connect. I was doing it to grow a band of people that would engage Netlify in a way that would be super impactful 5 years, 10 years later. So I put up on the screen 100 people, and 100 people is a goal that I think most people, like if you give a talk in a multi-track conference, you're probably gonna get 100 people in the room. If you get more, that's great. If you get less, maybe next time, but about 100 people will show up in the room. If you're on the main stage, which honestly, if you can keynote a conference and you basically just won, like raise another round of funding because you're getting keynote spots and talking. So and that's when you sort of did something right. But what I'm getting at is those 100 people, out of those 100 people, it's like probably maybe 5 of them will come up and talk to me after, or will engage with the content, or like and follow. So like I think what a lot of times we'll get stuck into, and I've saw this in San Francisco when we'd host events at GitHub, the developer advocates would host the event, or the community managers, and then they would like force people to sign in so that way they can have their like collect information or logins or whatever. And it was like a really bad, it always felt weird because at GitHub at the time, like we had no sign in. The way the office was set up is that you just sort of walk in. As long as if you were drinking, you had to check in with your ID. But other than that, you come in, it's an open space, like you have the event, you go have the food, and it's like a great experience for everybody. But when you have to attach, hey, I want you to sign up for this thing before you leave, then everybody's going to be rubbed the wrong way about your product. And then everybody's going to remember, yeah, the one time I went to this thing, I had to sign up for GitHub and I'm never using GitHub again, which is not realistic, but I'd use that as an example, not to throw anybody up the bus. So and actually it's a good question, because with the way I approach this with Netlify is we had a booth at React Rally. It was the first time I tried this, and it was wildly successful. We had a Nintendo Switch and we had it at the booth. That's all we had, and a bunch of stickers. And we said, if you switch to Netlify, you have a chance to win this Switch. And the way we did this is like the only thing you had to do is deploy this one site. It wasn't a magical site. It's happened to have a Gatsby site at the time, was pretty popular. They go into the repo on GitHub. They click the deploy Netlify button. Then they have a site on Gatsby. They can walk away and they enjoy it. And then what we did is everybody who deployed the site, you'd have to go into the site you deployed, and there's instructions to tweet. Hey, I switched to Netlify, ha ha ha. And so based on those tweets, we basically just said, hey, we're gonna collect these tweets, and whatever Twitter account comes in this one node generated server that picked a random tweet from this hashtag, you won the switch. Congratulations. And the whole point was like, hey, we just want you to try Netlify. That's it. Like, we don't want you to like sit and go through a form and tell me like if you're a decision maker at the company or whatever. Just click the button and walk away. And if you don't win, at least you have a Gatsby site. And we had probably 3 or 4 people. It was a 3-day conference. 3 or 4 people come to us the next day and say, hey, I switched my entire blog to Netlify. Because like once I had the Gatsby thing, it clicked how easy this was. And this was back in 2017. So mind you, like we had some options. We had Zeit now. We had Heroku, which was for getting node apps on Heroku. It was a lot of steps. Well, there wasn't a lot of steps. There was like proc files, and there was things you had to know in addition to JavaScript. So Heroku was kind of out of the question for most developers who just didn't use it regularly. But at the time, to be kind of frank, like Vercel or /Zeit, they didn't have a booth, and we had a booth. So like we were showing you how easy it was to get a React app live in production. And that was all we did. Like, we didn't try to chase anybody down. Once we were out of the switch, we didn't even show up the last day. Like, all the stickers were gone. We just sort of walked away. And I think that it seems kind of brash to be able to walk in and be like, oh, we're not even going to use our 3rd day at the conference. But the job was done. Like, we walked away with 300 people who signed up for Netlify at a conference of like 700. So like the opt-in rate for it was like almost 50% people actually signed up for the thing. And like, we weren't taking information, we weren't taking emails. It was just tweet the thing and you have a chance. If you don't tweet, you have a site. And I would say like what the takeaway like really is just like try to remove the friction for the first experience. Because the one thing I used to always talk about at Netlify, like in the room, Matt and Chris, the guys who who run the company right now, I used to always talk about the Facebook effect and like with Facebook ads. And like, it's not about clicking the ad on Facebook. And that's why the retargeting, why it works so well. It's about the 3rd time you see it. And you're like, oh, you know what? These are the jeans I was looking for. I'm just going to click it and see how much the price is. And like, once you're looking at the price, you're going to buy it. You're pretty much golden at that point. So like, I wasn't trying to get people converted to Netlify after the first reaction. I wanted that first reaction to be the first of 3. So what would happen is like later when you saw on stage, you said, oh, someone from Netlify is talking. I just deployed a site to Netlify. Now I know I can do Netlify functions. Now I know I can do redirects. Now I can do all this other stuff. But like, we weren't preaching that from the booth. We were preaching, hey, just get the switch. If you don't want the switch, move on. That's fine. And then it just makes it so much easier. And I would say the reason like we approached that is because we weren't marketers, and I was allergic to marketing. So like, I didn't want to do any of that stuff. And this is pre-GDPR too as well. Well, I guess the conference in Utah, so still doesn't matter in Utah, but regardless, like, we just didn't want to have to collect information and then be shepherds of that information. Because like, if what happens if that Google sheet gets loose and then we have this lawsuit in our hands, it was just sign up for the thing. So hopefully that answers the question. I would talk about the Beehive. Open source is our Beehive. Open source as a whole is not our Beehive. Open source maintainers, that is my current Beehive. So I do a lot of interactions with open source maintainers. I do this thing called Open Source Friday. And I realize I have a whole nother story, which I talk about getting lost in the sauce and why there's a joke but I think I spent a little too much time on this. Getting lost in sauce, a Gucci Mane quote. I built a product, or I say product, it's really a project. It's an open source project called Open Sauce. And it's like my platform to do the minor league programming or the minor league engagements outside of GitHub. So if I have an idea or if I want to try something out, I do it under the banner Open Sauce. And I did this intentionally because GitHub's it's a well-known property. So like, if I just sort of like half-ass something or just like only do low effort, I can do this with Open Sauce. But if I do it at GitHub, people are going to start asking questions. So I've created this second property for me to be able to try things out. And it's a real working project. It actually encourages open source contributions. You can track your contributions. It uses the GitHub API, so it gives me opportunity to talk about that. And it gave me an opportunity to sort of engage community in a different way. So I highly recommend if you're doing advocacy, if you're doing marketing, like Twilio has a great thing, which they call it the, it's like their gaming thing that they bring to the Twilio Quest. That's what they call it. Like it's a whole other thing. They have like full on engineers working on this thing and engaging their community. But it's like you don't log into Twilio. Well, you do log in Twilio for it, but like you experience Twilio in a different way, and like you get something away from it. In 2018, I appeared on this show, which is a live stream. I use show as a stretch, but Jason, he is developer advocate at Netlify, and he hosts a weekly live stream or multiple days live stream on how to learn with Jason. So someone comes on, an expert teaches Jason something. So I taught him GitHub Actions. Mind you, I started live streaming in 2018 as like on a whim for fun, but wasn't consistent. And Jason invited me. He's like, no, hey, live streaming's still happening. Like you should come on my show and like, I'll show you how it works. So like the whole time I'm like this, I think I just got back from somewhere in Europe and I was like dead tired. And I'm like, okay, I got to wake up at 12 o'clock in the afternoon to do this live stream. Or I guess at this point it was 3:30, but I was just like dead tired. Like my energy was pretty low on the stream if you watch this. But the one thing I took away was like, there's people actually chatting with them. There's people engaging with them. He was pulling in like 100 people who were just hanging out in the chat. And he's bringing those numbers every single week. And then I look back and I was like, wow, he's actually doing this like legit and pulling in like 3,000 to 5,000 to 7,000 views based on the person who they brought in. So like he's bringing all their audience to hit this thing. And now he's just building this entire platform under the moniker Learn with Jason. Mind you, Learn with Jason is Jason's thing. Like it's not a Netlify thing. It's his own thing that he makes his job super easy. And we had a conversation about this because Jason was like burnt out on traveling way before. And he figured that he could do this and connect with all the people he likes connecting with, but he doesn't have to leave Portland. And he's just been doing this for so long that he's now just sort of a bedrock when it comes to live coding. So I'm like, man, if Jason can do this, here's my janky setup where I started doing live coding under the moniker Open Source. And it actually did pretty well. Like people actually were interested in the project I was working on. They were interested in my insight. My stream didn't look as good as it does today, but I just sort of just did it. I used like a pretty cheap webcam and I had a green screen. I had a green screen since the beginning, but what I'm getting at is I just started doing it and then it picked up to the point where now I'm doing it for GitHub as well as some other platforms as well. And to remind you, in February 2020, I mentioned that conference we went to and we all sat down and tried to decide what was our next thing. Because once we went to Brussels for FOSDEM, when we came back, I had a Chinese stamp in my passport from 2018. So like they kept questioning me about it. I'm like, oh, why are you questioning about my Chinese stamp? Like that was like a long time ago. Well, it was because the coronavirus was like really starting to pick up and I wasn't paying attention to the news. I was traveling. Like I don't have time for the news. So really quickly in February, all events got canceled. And as it goes, we started in February, I started weekly live streams because everything was canceled. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to live stream every week now. By March, I started having weekly guest streams and inviting people to sort of try out, hey, can I have a guest? Does this work? How's this conversation work? And then by April, we launched the Twitch, the GitHub Twitch. And then since then, we've got different, I don't do everything on Twitch, but we have different teams at GitHub who are now live streaming on a regular basis. Our support team, our partner engineering team, our product team, the DevRel team. We're now encourage everybody to sort of come on, have their own quote unquote show and create their own call to actions. So a lot of people have different call to actions for why they're on the stream, but we're able to figure this out live on the air. So I also want to make this, as I round up some of these slides, twitch.tv/GitHub. The thing I do is called Open Source Friday. And the one thing I want to point out is we get about 100 people to show up. Now, when you think about GitHub, 50 million developers worldwide, 100 people is not a lot. Like that's kind of underwhelming, to be quite honest. But my whole goal was never to have 5,000 people show up on Twitch because I could do that on YouTube. Like we have a very popular YouTube account. What I wanted is I want to grow a community of folks to engage with about these features and then find my next advocate that's going to go support the feature that I'm trying to support in the future. So like, do my job for me, come to this thing, we'll have a chat after, or you'll connect through Twitter or whatnot. So the goal has always been 100 people. And like, we're doing this pretty regularly at this point. And some of the benefits of it is these are the original streams. But I want to point out that the time that in May, so we went from April to May. May is when we sort of figured it all out. I had Tim from Vercel Next.js, and he came on and he brought his entire community with him. So the one thing I realized is that this thing's only gonna be as good as the people you bring on. So like, not that I only need to bring the top elite open source maintainers, but it does help. So like when Tim goes on there, the entire Next.js community comes on, and then a good like 10% of them will stick around for the next week. So we've had like Evan Yu, we've had a couple of the Home Assistant, we've had Octoprint, a couple of the big projects that's been around for a while who are bringing their community along for the ride. And then what happens is, in the middle of the conversation, I get to introduce them to GitHub Actions. I get to introduce them to GitHub Code Spaces. I get to introduce them to all the stuff I would want to do at a conference. I'm doing it way more in a higher hit rate than I would do if I traveled to Belgium and got 100 people in the room. Because 100 people in that chat, probably about 50% of them will click a link if I drop it in the chat while they're on stream. So that's like something 50 people is much better than 10. And I was getting more like 10 if I'd go somewhere else or go have drinks in France or something. A couple things to sort of take away. And the thing I didn't even realize was actually a really good success for us is creating a meetup site. Now, Meetup, you can replace this whatever you want, but the thing is that Meetup is a known property. So we created a Meetup account. Actually, we already had a Meetup account, but we leveraged the Meetup account to have a place so people can actually find these events organically. Because Twitter is a stream of information. If you tweet it, you got to tweet it multiple times, and no one. I don't want to do that. So I created a Meetup account so that way people who log in can grow the community in a very GDPR friendly way. Because I don't collect any information. I don't collect emails. Actually, you can't collect. It's not possible to collect emails from Meetup unless you explicitly ask them to fill out a form for email. But what we learned from this is that we at GitHub, and the other thing about GitHub is we don't send emails. So it's very hard to track your community unless you force them to GitHub. And we didn't want to do that because it kind of felt jarring moving from Twitch to GitHub. So we just created a Meetup. I don't think we're going to be a Meetup forever, but for now, if you just for bootstrapping this thing together, Meetup works because we can't to send the email at GitHub. We have to go through a lot of red tape because we just don't send emails. We just respect. Not that you don't respect your communities, but we respect our developer community in a sense that we just make it super hard for anybody to send an email. Cool. The one thing I did want to point out is that this platform. And I didn't really go into a lot of different content as well. I can actually answer that question in Q&A. But this platform has been a really godsend when it comes to launching new features. So back in October, we open sourced our entire docs. And we already had a platform to share this, which was the blog. So we obviously shipped a blog post and a tweet. But to actually get the nitty gritty and talk to engineers about how they did this and how they approach like taking something that was private and making it open source, we were able to bring Janice on. Actually, Janice is the PM, but Janice came on and talked about the technical aspect of actually switching something from private to public and what had to be done and how they manage that community that way. So she came on Open Source Friday. It was open source. It made sense. Also going to shout out that Open Source Friday was a known property at GitHub that existed, that we've built. So having a name that already existed made it super easy for us to get the buy-in from the rest of the leadership team as well. The other thing that I want to point out is that we've recreated the same Open Source Friday experience into remote and regional meetups. So we have a meetup that we host actually that happened this morning called GitHub Africa. And we have GitHub users who run the entire event. So we give them everything they need to run the event. We support them technically. We're in the back room in StreamYard, and they're running their entire event on the brand of GitHub, and they're elevating them. Like IO actually just took a job at Stack Overflow. So like we're able to elevate folks who you would normally have to go travel to Nigeria or Sudan or whatever, or South Africa to go connect with these folks. We created a platform for them to connect with us, and we just sort of elevate them and get their next advocate jobs, which that's what IO is doing. He's an advocate at Stack Overflow at this point. So we essentially revived the GitHub YouTube account. And I point that out because there's some opportunity in how DevRel works. And I showed that tweet that I shared of everything about DevRel I knew was a lie. And I think it's true only because everything has changed. Like, I don't think we're going to go back to the 10,000 person or 7,000 person KubeCon in San Diego. I think what we're going to have is we're going to have regional events and regional meetups to begin with. So like we might have our San Francisco meetups by the end of this year, but we're not going to go, like, I would not highly not recommend travel to Austin or travel to New York if you're not already there. Mainly because like I think the folks are going to be very squeamish of attending an event if everybody's flying in for it, mainly because the situation we're in currently. So I just pointed this out because we've reinvented our YouTube account, where previously what we did is we just shipped, if we did a conference, we just put all of our videos from the conference on YouTube, and then we like wiped our hands, we walked away. And I think it's a format that worked previously. But when you think about the future, you're going to have to start creating YouTube content that looks like YouTube content. So I point out Jay-Z and Beyonce, who's also reinvented themselves as well. Beyonce, never been a rapper, but Beyonce's rap game is pretty strong to the point where she won a Grammy from it with Megan Thee Stallion. You have to reinvent yourself. You got to reinvent what your properties look like, and you have to be able to adjust. So like if you're doing guest posts on other blogs and you're not getting a lot of engagement and traction, you got to take that and learn from it. So like the Twitch streaming that we did right now, we've learned from it. Like we used to do 2-hour streams. Now we do 1-hour streams because we realized that the 1-hour stream is actually way more engaging and it's better content for YouTube after the fact. And the extra hour is just a bunch of riffraff and back and forth that we can just focus the conversation a little more and get a good YouTube video and a good live stream out of the same thing. So I point that out. I forgot why I had the slide here. Oh, I mentioned that I only have a couple slides left, but my minor leagues of open source, I also have a Discord. That's the other thing about GitHub is like we're not going to create a Discord for just GitHub. And we do that intentionally because for us to have a Discord, we'd have to have a support team to actually manage that community. We found that with Slack in the past years. You create a Slack community, it gets dead, and then everybody's just spamming it or no one's using it. So we're very cautious about creating things like Discord for just GitHub events or communities. But in that sense, I've created my Discord because I have an open source Discord for people who want to connect with me about GitHub and open source and other things. I do that because just personally as a DevRel or developer advocate, I need to be advocating for folks. But if I'm not constantly writing view code or constantly doing Svelte or constantly doing other stuff, I need to find my 100 people that can give me that information, and I can dig up whenever the time is available as well. So the one thing I just wanted to bring up is that I have a MVP group that I leverage as BDuggy, and then I have a group that I leverage at GitHub, and both of those groups are supporting different things for me. So keep that in mind as if you are, everybody's kind of on different roles, but if you're advocating, if you have a community, consider what your community looks like in 2021. Also want to shout out that I have a video. So my video I did today was a 3-part series. So I have another video about a developer who recently took a developer advocate job at New Relic. So that's not Bald Bearded Builder, but I have this screenshot here because there's a trend that's happening right now. Folks who just live streamed as engineers and nothing else are now getting picked up to join DevRel teams. So if you think of like the NBA, and sorry, I'm going to go off the rails a little bit, but the NBA, we saw kind of a renaissance in the NBA in 2015, where the 3-point shot was reinvented by the Warriors and a couple other different teams, where every team felt like they needed to have a 3-point shooter. So then what happened was all the 7-foot centers who couldn't shoot threes, they got bumped down in the roster and eventually cut. And we saw a lot of centers sort of just leave the NBA because they couldn't shoot threes and forwards and all this other stuff. What I'm saying is there are people who are really good at traveling and really good at engaging communities on the road. It's a hard thing to say, but as a DevRel manager, if I have someone who only can travel and can only get conference speaking, and they're not making YouTube, they're not writing blog posts, they're not engaging Twitter communities, they're not doing TikToks, it's going to be a hard thing to do DevRel in the next year if you're not engaging these new platforms, streaming, YouTube. Start your blog up again. Like the one thing I did is I stopped writing blog posts because I was traveling so much. So as soon as I stop traveling, you better believe I'm writing blog posts. I got to stay relevant. I got to shoot that 3 because you're not shooting 3s, you're going to get cut. And that's again, it's a hard thing to say, but it's something you really got to think about. How can we sort of reinvent our team and our strategy in the current climate? This is my site, BW Live. I mentioned I do have a community. I do have a YouTube as well. I talk a lot about the DevRel concepts and less on technical stuff, mainly because the technical stuff is really good gold for other content. So I know a lot of folks will do YouTube and all they do is just sort of like, hey, here's Next.js. Here's how to use it. Here's how to deploy it. I've actually avoided that type of content, mainly because everybody's doing it. And I've actually been doing this type of content where I just sort of espouse my experience as a developer relations advocate, manager, staff person. So if you're interested in hearing more about this, I do have a YouTube account and I do have a podcast, which is Heavybit. It's on the Heavybit network called JAMstack Radio, which we always end up getting into, depending on what DevRel person's on the air, we always end up sort of scratching the surface in these concepts. So I say all that because I put GitHub there again, but some content I've done that, and I keep saying I only have a couple slides. I've had 10 slides for the last couple slides, but 2 slides left. I did this thing in February where I wanted to experiment, and it's a thing that I've done where I experimented on GitHub channels and I experimented on my channel, which is my Twitter account. And every day for the month of February, I did a tip on GitHub Actions. And this is intentional because what I found was when you see the GitHub Actions content, it's all introductions. So it's like, hey, let's look at the features page. And sorry, when I say this is introductions, it's all community created content. So if I go to YouTube and I look for GitHub Actions videos, I would just find, here's an introduction, here's the features page, here's the pricing page. Okay, let's build an action. And it's like exactly the same generic stuff that we have in the docs already. And I wanted to encourage more YouTubers and more streamers to go deeper into GitHub Actions and do more advanced feature stuff. So I did that. I did it for 28 days. And this is like, I do a lot of content, but I always try to gauge myself to not overpower a community that I'm trying to empower. So I did 28 tips. I went very advanced. And I just sort of expose all the things you could do in GitHub Actions that people just weren't doing. So I did that, and that is the bedrock of all my content for the rest of the year. When I talk about GitHub Actions, is those 28 posts. It actually did very well. We're talking like 60,000 impressions on Dev2. I think it was 300,000 impressions on Twitter. Mind you, this is from my 5,000 follower Twitter account, so it was not from GitHub. And I intentionally did that because I wanted to make sure that this was organically finding themselves in the people's feeds. Also, I have a really good 100-person community that I just showed you that were retweeting and big up my stuff the entire month. So I say that as an example, like the way I approach this, and I'm going to do a blog post on this as well. Actually, I did it in my newsletter, but I'll do a blog post as well. Every morning or every night, I would just think of an idea by just all the existing, because I was traveling a lot. So I had a lot of examples of GitHub Actions I was giving from stage. I had more than 28 examples. I had like 50. So I just took 28. I talked to the product managers. I talked to engineers. I said, what would be the best ones to show at this time? Also, I talked to support as well. Like, what would be the best to show at this time? I got feedback. Those are the ones I showed. And then from those, there were very clearly like 4 of them that sort of stood out from the rest as far as engagement of like, aha, I didn't know you could do this. I ended up turning that into a github.com blog. And I did 4 tips that you didn't know about GitHub Actions. And that was a thing. And I just ensured my engagement because I practiced it on my own channel. And then I had the 4 best tips and I put it on GitHub channel, which when I say channel, I mean the blog itself, the channels of marketing or whatnot.